What's going on, boys and girls? Welcome back to another video by yours truly. So the honeymoon phase is over with Arknights Endfield, and I did a nice little experiment where I wanted to kind of get an answer as to how this game's launch measured up against some of the big hitters in the space like Hoyoverse and Kudo Games. Because a lot of people can make certain statements like, oh, it's doing this good or it's doing this bad, but there's always verifiable like data and information that can be looked at and analyzed in terms of how it fares against Wuthering Waves, Honkai Star Rail, Endless Zone Zero, and then you'll have an answer that is more trustworthy than just a he said, she said situation. And so with that said, I went to my favorite website for graphs on these gacha games and games in general, which is Google Trends. Google is still the #1 by a large margin, most widely used search engine across the scope of the globe. And I mean by a large margin. And so I love looking at this to try and get an idea as to how these games are doing in their launch windows. Quick little disclaimer before we get into the video about Google Trends, though, is it's mainly a reasonable proxy for popularity and market interest, but it cannot reference or be a data source for how much money these companies are making. In fact, it's probably the worst source to try and use as a reference point for that. Google Trends uses YouTube as well as the Google search engine itself to reference that market interest and popularity. So that means platforms like Twitter, for example, is not going to be taken into account, which I'm completely okay with that because I'll be real, boys, I think Twitter has bought it to all hell. I'm of the belief that 50% of the accounts on Twitter just are bots. So that is something that's not taken into account. And then, of course, a very important variable for me is mainland China. I think Google's banned there. They use their own search engine. So Google doesn't take into account that, which means it can't accurately represent market interest and popularity in China. And Bilibili is included in that because Bilibili is the YouTube of China and Google Trends ain't using that either, right? So that, I think with the exception of China, Google Trends is a very reliable source for market trends and popularity for these games and how quickly they scale down. And well, for what it's worth, boys, I'm a Western content creator and China's nowhere to be seen up here, right? I'm not talking to Chinese people as my market audience. I'm talking to the United States of America, Philippines, Indonesia, India, Canada, Malaysia, United Kingdom, Germany, Brazil, Vietnam, Australia, Thailand, so on and so forth. I'm just kidding. Really, honestly, it's just these top 5 up here with the massive bulk of it being United States. And shout out to them Filipinos, bro. Them some Filipinos be supporting, bro. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. Just for some context here, basically, I took Honkai Star Rail, Genshin Impact, Wuthering Waves, Endless Zone Zero, and Arknights Endfield, and then I spanned it across the past 5 years, which, by the way, that still doesn't take into consideration when Genshin Impact launched, which was a whole beast of its own. Just to give you guys a bit of a perspective, if we go all the way back to 2004, you'll be able to see this is Genshin Impact when it launched during the pandemic, and these are all the rest of the little guys in the gacha space, right? As we all know, Genshin Impact had one of the biggest cheat codes of all time, the pandemic. And then it launched, and it was the first real anime gacha game that was just an anomaly at that point in time. It blew everybody away with those shell-shaded Breath of the Wild graphics. The rest is history. And so when we go back over here to this 5-year mark, we have Honkai Star Rail at blue. We have Wuthering Waves as yellow. We have green for Endless Zone Zero. And then now finally we have Arknights Endfield. And what I find interesting about Google Trends is just how accurately it can depict certain events, so on and so forth. Like when you look at HSR right here and then you see it fall off and you see it revive again, it will reflect like certain events that actually occurred, like the 2.0 launch or the anniversary and stuff. You'll see the spikes happen. And if you go to the current time periods, you'll come to find out it's lining up exactly with those time periods of when those hype windows launch. Case in point, Wuthering Waves fell off a cliff and did worse than all games because that launch was really that bad. But then you'll see right here when it shoots up in December 2024, but since it's spread out in 5 years, this is December and January. And guess what? January 2nd, I believe, was when 2.0 launched for WUWA, hence that massive spike. And so I love looking at Google Trends because it really does have a very solid amount of groundwork for data that cooperates with certain patches and when they launch and when they drop certain things. So with that said, this is the 5-year mark. Now, one of the things I want you guys to take into consideration is HSR was at a 53-point value in terms of its launch when you compare it to Genshin Impact. Genshin Impact's always going to be the ceiling because it was just a beast of its own, and it still is. That's just how massive that game was. It literally was a genre-changing game for the gacha space. And so in comparison to Genshin, it's at a 53-point mark during its peak. right? And then we got Wuthering Waves, a 45-point mark, which is actually insane because that means Wuthering Waves almost had as big of a launch as Hoyo's next child after Genshin Impact, which was Honkai Star Rail, but not quite. It had a bigger launch than Zenless Zone Zero, which ZZZ was only at 41 points. And then it had a bigger launch than Arknights Endfield, which is only at 34 points. And yeah, that might surprise you, but Arknights Endfield had a smaller launch window in terms of the relevancy in Google searches and popularity than both ZZZ and Wuthering Waves. And then of course, it lost to HSR as well. And so one of the things I wanted to do now is show you guys, I have 4 different tabs open up here. And these tabs are going to reflect the first 3 weeks of each of these respective games in terms of how they launched and then how that launch scaled downwards. Because in the gacha space, and in all games actually, you're always going to scale downwards. The launch is going to be your absolute peak of capturing a market, and then people are going to try it, and they're inevitably, you cannot retain every person that tries your game. There's no way, unless you're Elden Ring, and even Elden Ring couldn't do that. But you're going to go down. But the question becomes, how did they scale down in comparison to each other? That is a very important question because that will tell you how well these games actually did in their launch windows as each passing week went by. So once again, 3 weeks. And the reason I did 3 weeks is because we're 7 days out from Arknights Endfield being a full month since its release. So I can only get a gauge on the 3-week window right now. It's literally impossible for me to do a longer window. So let's go ahead and start off with it. We got Zenless Zone Zero. It started off at 100 point. That was his peak. And it dropped all the way down to 15 points. So we went from 100 points, which is the peak, all the way down to 15 points in a 3-week window. That's worldwide. If we go to United States only, then you'll come to find out that it went from a 15 point down to a 13 point. So it actually did even worse in the United States than it did worldwide. That's not the case for all of them. Now, if we go over to the next one, we have Honkai Star Rail. Honkai Star Rail started off at 100 points, and then worldwide, it dropped down after 3 weeks to 36 points. And guess what? HSR still to this day had the best launch out of all 4 games. HSR had a good launch. It didn't have no jank bull or PayPal hacked your whole accounts, buggy stuff. It was polished. It was crisp. It was actually good. Everybody was enjoying it, so on and so forth. And it still dropped off from 100 down to 36 points. Now in United States, when we clicked United States, it actually did a better. It dropped down to 39 instead of 36. So HSR is the ceiling of a 3-week launch when you measure it up against all these other gacha games. It held on to a majority of its community, not a majority, in comparison to the other peers, it held on to way more of its audience that it initially had over the scaling of that 3-week cycle. Now we come over here to Wuthering Waves. Wuthering Waves went from 100 points all the way down to 11 points worldwide. That is the biggest drop off we've seen so far. And if we come over here to United States, Wuthering Waves then came up to, it did even worse in the West, actually. Went down just 1 more point. So Wuthering Waves literally lost 90% of its audience when it first launched. That just goes to show just how bad that launch was for WuWa, despite them giving out all kinds of compensation to try and make up for the bugs, the crashes, and the jank. It really was a nightmare, guys. And so it went from 100 down to 10. Now, finally, what about Arknights Endfield? How did it fare? If we come over here, Arknights Endfield was at 100 points. We've got that 3-week window, just like we have for every single other one. And for worldwide, it came all the way down to 18 points. So that's 8 points higher than Wuthering Waves. Well, actually, 7 points higher than Wuthering Waves worldwide. We'll then show the United States here in a bit. And that's also higher than Zenless Zone Zero, making it the second best launch since Honkai Star Rail. Now, the thing is, Honkai Star Rail mogs all of them in that launch window. To be fair, though, Honkai Star Rail had the Giga Genshin Impact buff. It literally dropped after Genshin. Genshin gave it the good old rub. So I would say HSR still had a cheat code buff in comparison. If you were to isolate HSR and not have the Hoyo buff, how would it have performed? I don't think it would have maintained all of that audience as well. You know what I mean? But regardless, the data here is the data here. With this in mind, First, let's go ahead and take a look at United States, right? So 18 points from 100 points was worldwide, and then it went up 1 point in the West. So it actually did just a little bit better in the West on Google Trends, Arknights Endfield, that is. And so with this data, we can see and we can extrapolate that Arknights Endfield actually did a little bit better with the audience it did capture. When you compare it to ZZZ and Wuthering Waves, it did worse than Honkai Star Rail. Now, with that said, what I like about all of this is it also just goes to show you how many people will quit a gacha game. Once the game launches, it hits its peak, it captures the people. How many people will quit on average when we compare to WuWa, ZZZ, and Arknights Endfield? 80% or more leave and quit the game and probably never come back. Now, when I come back over here, I want you guys to understand just how significant WuWa's launch was when it came out with 2.0, because it was down here at a 7 before 2.0. That's dangerously low. In fact, it went down to a 6. And then when 2.0 launched, it went all the way up to 17, triple its point value in relevancy on Google with 2.0 launch. So you could see that 2.0, it saved. I mean, it literally saved WuWa. WuWa would have probably stayed at that 7.6 and probably dropped down to a 5 and probably would have been there for, in perpetuity. But WuWa's 2.0 was so significant, such a monumental change in almost every facet possible. Voice acting quality, music quality, exploration, story, pacing. The combat was always still the combat, you know what I mean? But pretty much in presentation, all of these variables, that patch was so undeniably good that it still did not bring back even half the market that it captured. And so now we are looking at Arknights Endfield. Arknights Endfield right now is finally on the decline. This is not an accurate representation of Arknights Endfield right now. When you go all the way back out 5 years, it's going to reflect a bit differently. Let's go back to a 1 year so that we can take a look at what Arknights Endfield is actually looking like. Yeah. So as you can see, Arknights Endfield, when you look at it in the 1 year lens, it is crashing hard, right? And this is normal. This is normal. If you go back and do a 1 year, the same way I put every gacha game in a 3-week cycle measurement, if you put every gacha game in a 1 year, you're going to see this exact same thing, if not worse, for ZZZ and WuWa. Honkai Star Rail did a better job kind of like putting it off. Honkai Star Rail is kind of like right here, right? And then it still maintained a lot of its audience. But as you can see right now, Arknights Endfield is 1 billion% heading towards over here. It's heading over here where both ZZZ and WuWa are. And that's what I want to talk to you guys about. What can Arknights Endfield do to prevent that from happening and try to maintain some of that audience? Because here's one of the things I want to get off my chest off the bat. 2.0 WuWa, I'm going to be honest, very fucking hard for another gacha game to do. It's very hard. It is. The flight being added in, the voice. Basically, what the devs of WuWa did is they said, guys, we have to, and I mean, we have to pour the biggest fucking budget we can into our story experience or our game is cooked. That was what WuWa decided. It wasn't, we have to fix our combat. It wasn't that. It wasn't, we have to fix our character models. I think their character models were good from the start. Chang Li was a banger. Yinlin was a banger. Shorekeeper was a banger. It was, we have to fix our story and that first launch window and that experience that people go through as they go through the story and the exploration and the music. Arknights Endfield. If you guys wait until your 2.0 launch, you will have already lost 90% of the audience you set out to capture. And if you do that, WuWa is a tangible proof that you can still be very successful with that audience that's left over and those returning players that come back, or the hype that goes on as the time trickles on. The thing is though, why should you wait that long? You might not be in a position because of the development and the dynamic of how live service games function. You guys are already working or already worked on the patches you're getting ready to put out months ago. And now you're just tweaking out the ends. And so you're not in a position to where you could expedite some of these big changes you may or may not be having in the future. And so we're in this position now where the question becomes, what can Arknights do to hold on to the audience it currently has and is currently losing? Well, I think worst case scenario, you go down there with ZZ and Wuwa and you still make a killing. And that's probably what you guys have already surmised is going to happen, and you're okay with that. But if you were to ask me, what could we do to even salvage some of the people we still have before they even take off? I think the story and the play that Kudo did in 2.0 needs to happen faster. Maybe if you could do that in 1.2, you hire much better voice direction, possibly even voice actors, and you ramp that shit up. You put a lot of budget in your presentation. You put a lot of budget in character development and character interactions. You unmute your fucking protag and give him more lines to where he's more inactive. It's all gonna start with that story. Because one thing about a story, especially in a live service game, is it can go on for a very long time. And these gacha players, no matter how shit your gacha game is in terms of its gacha, no matter how shit it is in terms of its lack of a replay value of combat, they will keep coming back if that story is bussin'. And we have seen that time and time again with Genshin Impact, with Honkai Star Rail, and now with Wuthering Waves, and with even Fate Grand Order. And so the story is the most important thing you guys need to all in on. Fuck your combat, fuck your factory, story. I'm telling you, that's what matters the most, the absolute most. Everything else, gacha players like to pretend like they care about a gacha game. And I'm sorry, the gacha system. They love pretending like, they love virtue signaling, they love critiquing it. We have already seen in every way possible, no matter how bad a gacha system is, gacha players will still stick around. So that this goes to show you that it ain't the gacha that matters. It's the story and the combat, or in the gameplay experience, right? So we fix the story. That's the first thing we can do. You fix it as fast as you possibly can, and you up the budget on it as fast as you possibly can. The next thing, your factory was both a risk and a strong benefit. The biggest risk of your factory system is it's a filter. A lot of people just ain't fucking with it, and it's going to scare them off. It had the most massive learning curve for so many players, and there's simply wasn't enough guides or, enough time and patience for people to stick around for it. So the factory is going to filter people. That's going to happen. It is what it is. But the factory system is also the same system that is keeping people around. And the hope that you're going to build on that foundation is also what's keeping people around. And so I think the next step for you is going to be expanding upon your factory system, adding more ways, or even just more factories, period, to make the experience more of an intricate depth, adding more ways of innovation, such as you did in Wuling with the water system. That's only exclusive to Wuling. The water system has to go into the forge. You need way more things like that. Not way more, but you need to consistently innovate in those ways in 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4. Maybe you'll have a one-off patch where you're chilling because you're, allocating budget here, there, everywhere. But you have to constantly expand on that factory system because that is literally half the replay value of Arknights Endfield. The last thing I would say is the combat. Your combat is actually not bad. It's got some pretty good aspects to it, and most importantly, breath of fresh air in comparison to everything else in the space in these open world games. You actually tried to differentiate from Genshin Impact in a number of ways, keeping all people on the field. Your combat is like a different twist on introing in. You don't have to swap characters. You then have I don't have to explain it. Everybody that plays the game knows your combat is definitely a bit different. And I think that's a good thing. The problem isn't what the player is able to do. The problem is what the enemy is doing with your game. And I know that now abundantly so because I'm in the middle of beating Elden Ring, where everything is dependent on the enemy, and not what you're doing is like it's bare minimum, So I think what needs to happen with Arknights Endfield is your sponge experience needs to get dimmed down a bit. Whether you increase the multipliers of the characters or you lower the health of the enemy. Right now, I am of the mentality, and this is respectfully speaking, where I just want to get your combat over with. When I did your new in-game mode and when I'm doing your combat period, I'm not really having fun. I'm kind of just going through the motions. When I was in the middle of that in-game experience, I was just like, okay, these guys aren't fun to fight. It's just taking so long to kill them. And I'm ready for this to be over with. And that is a bad mentality to have as a consumer that's playing a game of combat. Just saying, and being respectful about it. And so I think what you could do is you can cut their health by maybe a quarter and instead increase the reaction and intensity of the mobs. Now you might be thinking to yourself, that might scare away the casual. And that's okay. I think it's okay if a casual is not willing to learn the combat system, the rotations, and so on and so forth. I think it's okay to let that casual go, because most casuals are going to go through the motions no matter what, and they're only going to be there for the story and the ambiance and the vibes. And so I don't think it matters if you guys make the combat more intense, a bit more sweat, because the casual is not playing the game for that aspect alone. Now, the other thing I want to say is your music is incredible, but there's not enough of it. I think you guys need to ramp up big time that music, especially when you have to spend a lot of time setting up zip lines and pre-prepping the map to be more efficient. While I'm doing that, it would be nice to have those fucking banger tracks that exist and apparently your prior title and in games like Wuthering Waves and in games like Zenless Zone Zero. And so I think there needs to be more music ramping up as well. Those are pretty much, I don't want to over fixate on all the criticisms to Planet Earth, but I think those are pretty much all the things that need fixing or immediate attention in Arknights Endfield. The rest, I think you guys are doing great. I love the zip lining. There's also little minor problems that just really ain't that big of a deal. Of course, they can be talked about, but who cares for now? The big problems are the ones I pointed out, but your polish is amazing. Your character designs, I think, are incredible. I think Last Right, Floor Right, and Levitain are some of the best designs in Gacha gaming. I do. I think all three of those characters look incredible. And I think you guys will continue to cook and meet that standard as time goes on. I think you guys are doing a great job with your factory system in terms of a 1.0 launch. There's a lot of people complaining that your factory system doesn't have enough. I think that's just ignorance or a inability to look at it from a perspective other than your own from people. Here's what I mean. Your 1.0 launch was very intimidating for a lot of people, just for the factory alone. And the tutorials were unbelievably like, holy shit, right? But the thing is, if you added even more on that, I think it just would have overwhelmed players, sensory overload, and they would just be like, fuck this. I think for a 1.0, you might have even put too much in there. That is probably like sounds crazy to some of you guys for me to say, because you're now in the in-game experience where you're twiddling your thumbs. But y'all are failing to understand just how many people, and myself included, played this for the first time and was like, fuck, bro, what is even happening with this? You know what I mean? And so I think they did just enough. I think they did just right. The thing is, what are you going to do in 1.1, 1.2, and 1.3? Because you got to start moving the wheel in those patches. 1.0, nice little groundwork for the factory system. Going forward, we have to expand. The factory must grow, and the intricate depth must go lower, right? And so that is my thoughts on everything. I'm not saying what I'm stating is the gold standard. This is kind of just what I saw based off all the data provided. You guys comment down below. Let me know what y'all think. Thanks for watching. Peace, love, and happiness. And I'll catch you guys on the flip side.